Hi, this is Christian Cantrell, and I want to show you a project I've been working on that enables me to control web-based music players with global keyboard shortcuts, or hotkeys, as they're sometimes called. I used to use iTunes to listen to my music, and although I've never been a particularly big fan of iTunes, one thing I did like was that I had these media keys that I could use to control my music, regardless of what application I was in, which was very handy. So I decided to figure out how I could make that same functionality work for web-based players. So I'll start out with the demo. So the first thing I want to point out is the music I'm going to be playing during this demo is music by Metaform, simply because I know he's cool enough not to sue me for using a couple seconds of his music, and I shouldn't get any takedown notices or anything like that. So Metaform, if you're watching, thanks. Alright, so this is Google Music, and typically the way you interact with this application is you click on the controls down here in the corner. In fact, that's really the only way to interact with it, which means that if you're in another application and you decide you want to play music or pause it or skip to another track or something like that, you have to move over to your browser again and you have to select the correct tab or whatever and go and interact with it, which is sort of a pain. So usually click the play button here and you start playing something, and then you click it again to hit pause. But the way I can use it is with my keyboard shortcuts. I can hit Shift F8 and I can play it like this. Pause, play, next track, or I can go back a few tracks. And pause it again. The reason I chose F8, F9, and F7 is because they correspond to the default media keys on a Mac keyboard, and it can be any keys at all. Now, this is really cool, this is really useful. This is something that probably could have just been implemented, I think, as a Chrome extension, which means that as long as you're in Chrome, you'd be able to capture those keyboard events, and you'd be able to crawl through the DOM and to click buttons and stuff like that. But that's not exactly what I wanted. I wanted fully global keyboard shortcuts so I could use it from any application at all. So if I switch over here to my code editor, let's say I'm sitting here running some code, and I decide I want to play some music. It still works. So you can see it's completely global, regardless of what application I'm in. I can pause and play my music. So that was Google Music. I also have support for Amazon Cloud Player and for Pandora Radio. I'm not going to demo Pandora Radio simply because I can't control the tracks that Pandora plays, and so I could wind up playing something that could get my video pulled or image over or something like that. So I'm sticking with what's safe here. Pandora's a little bit different because it doesn't have a concept of a previous track. It only has play, pause, and next, but that's all built into the architecture, so it's very easy to handle. So let me show you how it works with Amazon Cloud Player. It's the same keystrokes. I'll just hit Shift F8, and it starts playing. And of course, I can switch to other applications and control everything. So it works great. In order to add support for new music players, I have essentially a plugin model, so it's very easy. It just takes a couple of lines of JavaScript, which are specific to the player that you want to interact with. So as long as the media player is written in HTML/JavaScript, whatever, then it's very easy to access. After I got the initial architecture and framework done, I was able to add support. I started with Google Music, and then I was able to add support for Amazon Cloud Player in about 5 minutes, and Pandora Radio in about 5 more minutes. It's very easy, so you can support whatever media players that you use. If you're interested in how this works, stick around. Part 2 of this video will get into the actual code and how it works and how you can set it up for yourself. Okay, so let's take a quick look at how all of this works. There are essentially 3 parts. There's a server, which is a Node.js server. There's a Chrome extension, which talks to the Node.js server. And then there's the portion of the stack that handles the global keyboard events. So let's start with the server. This is it right here. It's very simple. It's only about 37 lines of code or so. And it more or less does 2 things. It uses Socket.io to listen on port 8000, and it accepts an incoming persistent TCP socket connection, WebSocket connection, which is going to come from the Chrome extension. And it just maintains that connection. It just sort of sits there and does nothing with it. And then it waits for regular HTTP requests to come in, also on the same port. And when an HTTP request comes in, it does a little bit of parsing, and then it forwards that data on
to the Chrome extension via the persistent connection. So it just sort of sits there and sends commands along. So let's take a look at the Chrome extension, which is where a lot of the magic happens. So it's up here in this directory, and this is the bulk of it here. So what we do here is in the init function, make this a little bit bigger. In the init function, we create that persistent socket connection to the node server, and we just sort of sit there and wait. And then whenever an event is received called music, then it calls this command function here. And what the command function does is it looks for which music players are currently active. It looks through all the tabs and tries to find Google Player, Amazon Cloud Player, Pandora Internet Radio, etc. And not the most elegant piece of code, but it works, and it's fine for now. And then it calls this control function, and it passes some arguments. And what the control function does is it actually loads the correct plugin or the correct script, which knows how to handle the specific media player that's being targeted. So here in this scripts directory, I have scripts for all the different players that I support, and each player I support has 3 scripts, one for next, one for play pause, and one for previous. So here's Amazon Next, Amazon Play Pause, Amazon Previous. I'll get into some more detail with Google Play Pause, because I think this is probably the most complicated one. This one took me a little while to figure out, because you apparently have to emulate quite a bit of user interaction in order to get the controls to actually do something. So what I'm doing is I'm just essentially creating a bunch of mouse events here. I have a mouse over event and another mouse over event, and these have to be done in the correct order. I have a mouse down event and a mouse up event to sort of simulate clicking on the button, and so all of this makes the application think that the user just clicked on the play or pause button. Here's the previous one, also kind of long. Pandora is a lot simpler. To go to the next track in Pandora is just one line of code. You basically just grab the skip button, and there's a link inside of it. First child, then you just click on it. So nice and simple. Pandora Play Pause, there's a little bit of logic in here because it has to check the display property of a couple of different buttons and see whether it's showing or not to determine whether it should be playing or pausing. And then the previous is a no-op because there is no concept of previous in Pandora. So it's just sort of a placeholder here. So that's how the Chrome extension works. And the third part is the portion of the stack which maps the global keyboard events to essentially to the server. So I'm using this application called Shortcuts. There's a lot of applications I think out there that do this kind of thing. I just grabbed this one. It seemed to be robust enough to do what I needed it to do. I was just going to use it for testing and then come up with a different solution or maybe write something myself or something like that, but it's working so well that there's no reason to replace it. I actually really like this application. But it doesn't really matter what application you use for this part, as long as you're able to map global keyboard events to HTTP requests. So the way I'm able to do that is by executing shell scripts. And so you can see I have 3 shortcuts set up here. And the one for play pause we'll take a look at. All I'm doing is using curl to make an HTTP request to my node server and passing in a couple of arguments. And of course, the next one is just passing in next, and previous is obviously just going to pass in previous. So what's actually happening here, I'll go through the whole thing in order. So shortcuts is capturing a global keyboard event, in this case, Shift F8. It's using curl to make an HTTP request to my node server, which is on localhost port 8000, and it's passing in a couple of arguments. The node server is parsing those arguments, and then it's passing them along to the Chrome extension, which it is using a persistent socket connection to talk to. And that's why it's so fast. There's no polling or anything like that going on. And the Chrome extension then looks through the tabs to see which media players you have active. And depending on which media players it finds, it loads the specific script or plugin. And that script then combs through the media player's HTML and emulates clicking on certain buttons. You could implement these plugins differently if you wanted to. If there were actually functions that could be called logically, you could just call a function called play or something like that. I did not find that to be the case because all of these, all the JavaScript in these players is either obfuscated and or sort of minified, and so I'm assuming that those function names change, and so I didn't really want to play that game. I just decided to go ahead and emulate user interaction, which works really well. I'll show you the whole thing in action here. So here's my node server, which is just showing some debug output, and I'm not sure what music I've queued up here, but I'll just hit Shift F8 and see. Apparently I don't have any music queued up, so let's go and see here. Okay, there we go. And so we can see the debug output on the right here, which is my node server receiving events. Right? And then if you look down here in the lower left-hand corner at the HTML page, at the player itself, you can see that the button's changing. And because I'm doing things like actually sending mouse over events, you can see that the button's white, and then when you mouse over it turns blue, and so that all happens as well. So it all works really well. I'm very happy with it. There are a lot of moving parts. I mean, this isn't simple to set up or anything. This isn't the kind of thing that anyone's just going to set up, and it's not sort of like a double-click install or something like that. But it works well if you're comfortable with using something like Node, if you're comfortable with Chrome extensions and setting this whole thing up. For me, it was worth it because I listen to music all day long, and I need to be able to play and pause from whatever application I'm in. So it's worth the trouble. What I'd really like to see is a specification that enables web applications to register for global keyboard events, which is something that I might pursue separately. But until that kind of thing happens, this works quite well. If you're interested in using it yourself or seeing how it works, all the code will be up on my on the blog post. So go ahead and check out the blog post. I'll put the URL in the video description, and you can download the files and give it a try for yourself. If you do something interesting with it, if you adapt it, if you add support for other music players, let me know. I'd be interested in seeing what people do with this. Thanks for watching.